For our last and final Quickfire talk of the day, we'll have Simon Gwozdz come and speak. He's the CEO and founder at Equatorial Space Industries, and he's from the National University of Singapore. So Simon, come on up.
Thank you so much. All right, hello everyone. Can I ask you a question? Do you all think that space belongs to everyone? Everyone, right? Makes sense. Well, it doesn't, but it should. So let me tell you about our company, Equatorial Space Industries. So firstly, I remember watching the 2016 International Astronautical Congress in Guadalajara, where Elon Musk was asked a bunch of bizarre questions, but there were some really good ones as well. And one that particularly stuck with me was regarding the involvement of non-US citizens with SpaceX. And obviously the answer was something about the technology, export controls and things like that. Basically, there's no guarantee that people outside of United States will get the same prime mover advantage in this grand vision for colonization of Mars and beyond. And that got me really concerned about that. And I think that was the turning point, and that's when we decided to do something with some of my partners. But before we talk about space, I would like to talk about something else. Something that's already inside of all our pockets. I'm talking, obviously, about these. This is the grand equalizer. Because no matter where you are, chances are you own one of these. And if you come from a developed country, it makes sense for you that technology progressed gradually. In 1876, that was the first phone, invented by Alexander Graham Bell, obviously. And radio came up in 1890s, TV in 1930s, then personal computing showed up only in 1970s. In 1994, I believe, the first protoplast of a smartphone came to being. And it took another 20 years or so before it became proliferated enough with iPhone and Samsung that it really became mainstream. And you see, if you're not from a developed country, this doesn't have to be the case. And a great example of that is Cambodia, a nation of 15 million people with a very troubled history. They didn't really get to progress linearly together with the rest of the world. And at this point, a very interesting thing about it is that only 5% of the population actually has a landline. But there's over 19 million subscriptions for mobile services. 19 million. That means more than, 4 million people in Cambodia has more than one phone, and an increasing number of that, smartphones. And the reason why this is so important is because this allows those people to compete with the rest of the world, communicate with each other, access information very much the same as everybody else. It's an agent of economic convergence. And why am I telling you all this, right? What's the relevance? Space is next. And we have a bunch of new technology, such as nanosatellites, CubeSat platforms, for instance, which allowed countries and organizations with limited budgets and no prior space heritage to jump on the same bandwagon. And we're obviously very familiar with that. There are many countries which could benefit from improved communications and monitoring of their own territories. That goes without saying. Indonesia, for instance, suffers from nearly annual forest fires. In 2016, that was a particularly bad year. In a single day, those forest fires released more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere than all of European economy combined. And if they had an early warning system based on inexpensive satellites that provides continuous information to them, they could easily put it down before it got out of control. Well, they didn't have the luxury of simply having the right information about their own territory. In sub-Saharan Africa, that's another interesting story. There is an increasing push to apply sensors for groundwater levels, for leakage detection, to optimize the water resources, especially in periods of drought. To optimize the resources, and very often those initiatives are government-controlled. So a continuous communication with every single one of those farms could optimize their water resources, improve their food security, and improve their standard of life, of living. So, the lucky thing for many of those countries is that they are very close to the equator. And the equator offers a very comfortable orbital choice. Obviously, we're talking about low inclination orbits. And if you have 20 or 30 satellites in near equatorial low Earth orbit, you get a continuous coverage of your territory 24/7. It's a very cheap solution. Basically, one orbital plane settles all your needs. But, you know, launch mechanics and orbital mechanics are a little tricky for everyone of you who has dealt with them. And if you want to launch into equatorial planes, you need to be close to the equator. And therefore, those countries don't really get to enjoy the luxury of having those constellations, which they would control and own, by the way, unlike, you know, a third-party provider, because there is basically no cost-effective and appropriate launch solution right now. So, what do we aspire to be? We aspire to be the first company in Southeast Asia to conduct commercial launch operations, dedicated for nanosatellites. So we're looking at a payload bracket which makes sense for nanosat and some microsatellite operators. And our technological choices aim at making it safe and cost-effective. So we are based in Singapore, which, well, many of you probably remember it from the recent summit between your president and Kim Jong-un. But more importantly, we have very strong petrochem, maritime and aerospace industries, which provide many of the building blocks required to get started with rocket development. We have good pro-startup policies. We have a very rapidly growing NewSpace community, very good ties with the United States, which is going to be helpful with ITAR. And at the same time, most importantly, we are in the direct vicinity of some amazing prospective launch sites. So as you can see, our priority, the one we would ideally get to use, would be on South China Sea. And the reason for that is not just the latitude, it's also the very close distance to Singapore, which means we would be able to drastically cut down on the logistical costs. But we have some option, we have Plan B, which is 2 other sites in Indonesia, as well as another one in Philippines. I'm aware of their efforts to spearhead a space program in that country, and we could possibly use their prospective facilities. So now let's get techie. You know the idea, you know the problem that we are trying to solve, and this is our idea how to exactly solve it. So Volans, our first generation launch vehicle, would be the only one in its class to get both the polar and equatorial orbits launch azimuths covered from the very beginning. We're looking at hybrid propulsion right now. We are not giving up on that just yet. It's tricky, but we are confident in making it work. We're looking at 2 stages, expandable configuration at first. You know, we want to get payloads up into the orbit first, then we can try to iterate it. We're looking at cadence of 150 flights a year, dimensions of less than 10 meters in length, which makes it very easy to handle and very inexpensive to bring around wherever we need to launch it from. And you see a preliminary estimates of our payload capacity. So it's basically between 70 kilograms into equatorial orbits and 31 to 400 kilometer SSO. And we are, I mean, if you have something to launch into full retrograde orbit, we can see what can be done. We're not planning to do that at this point, and we are hoping to price it at $1 million per launch. So if you wonder what Volans means, it's a constellation on the southern sky, which represents a flying fish, because we would hope to launch it from a platform at sea. So you can say we give a flying fish about the problems faced by satellite operators. All right. So we are new. I'm making it up front. We started only last year with this really primitive-looking thing on the left. That was basically just a piece of wood with acrylic rod in the middle and some gaseous oxygen running into it. Then we moved on to our second prototype, which we did in January, and it had some basic form of thrust vectoring in place. And we are now developing the next prototype, which is going to hit the right specific impulse and thrust-to-weight ratios, which were required for the actual flight. and we hope to finish it in July. We had some delays, which is why we couldn't unfortunately finish it before this presentation. We tried, didn't work, sorry. Okay, and for those investors among you, you might be interested in what's our grand vision. I started from talking about Mars, and obviously, yes, we are looking at going beyond Earth's orbit. In the immediate first steps, we're looking at developing heavier launchers, because GEO is definitely a logical step for us because of our inclination. Initially, yes, we do want to focus on the dedicated nano and microsatellite launching, but we don't want to stay there. We're looking at diversifying into things like spaceport operations for other companies based in that region, space tourism, asteroid mining. That's all fun to think about. It's going to take some time. In a more immediate future, we do hope to enter the DARPA Launch Challenge. We're going to do our bloody best to qualify for it. It won't be easy, I'm sure. And, well, Volans is only the beginning, because we believe that space is for everyone. Thank you. So, any questions? You can ask either now or afterwards. I'm very happy to answer anything.
So I can see the need. I'm curious about what the reception has been for the different countries in the area that could benefit the most.
All right, so we are in touch with the Indonesian Space Agency, which actually happens to have the regulatory framework already in place, which makes life much easier for us. We are in the preliminary contact at this point. We are also in touch with some startups which are planning to deploy equatorial constellations, specifically Equatorial. So far the reception was cautious but positive. Anybody else? Anyway, thanks for bearing with us. It's a 15-hour flight from Singapore, and I know we are all after lunch, so no thanks. Thank you.